Hello everyone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Story begins. The ones who do the work don't get the tips. The ones who get them are the ones with access. She said it casually, like it was normal, as if the truth had been buried so long it had become part of the wallpaper. But that morning, inside a crowded food court café, a man in a worn baseball cap and faded hoodie was sitting only 3 feet away. He heard every word. The coffee in front of him was nothing special, $2.40, a paper cup already losing its heat. But the moment that sentence left her mouth, it tasted like something else entirely, bitter, metallic, laced with betrayal. Jackson Reeves, founder and CEO of a restaurant empire worth hundreds of millions, had walked into this cafe disguised as a nobody. To everyone here, he was just another tired customer, someone too ordinary to be noticed. That was the point. Across the counter, the young woman in the yellow polo, her name tag slightly bent, apron strings frayed, slid the stack of bills toward the manager without a word. Her lips trembled, but her voice stayed low. She had no choice. The manager, dressed in a crisp white shirt and navy tie, plucked the money from her hand like it was his by birthright. His smile was thin, his tone sharper than the steam hissing from the espresso machine. "Remember," he said, almost mocking, "we don't make the rules. We just follow them." No one around questioned it. Customers sipped their lattes, stirred sugar into paper cups, and scrolled their phones. A trainee by the pastry rack looked up once, hesitated, then lowered his eyes. Silence was the safest currency here. Jackson leaned back slightly in his chair, studying the scene. On paper, this cafe location had been performing fine, better than fine. Sales were steady, foot traffic high, margins strong, but the turnover rate was through the roof. Staff quit quietly, their names replaced on schedules like nothing had changed. Now, sitting here, he saw it. It wasn't laziness. It wasn't incompetence. It was something colder, a system quietly draining the life out of the people who worked the hardest. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly. The neon open sign flickered at the edge of his vision. A chipped ceramic mug sat abandoned on the counter, lipstick still marking the rim. All of it looked ordinary, but beneath it, something was off. Jackson glanced down at his hands. He wasn't holding a boardroom report or a quarterly projection, just a flimsy paper cup. Yet inside that cup was the reason he came. To see what numbers couldn't show, to find the cracks that spreadsheets never admit. The young woman Cassie, as he'd later learn, returned to the floor, moving with quiet precision. She carried trays, wiped tables, and smiled just enough to pass. But her eyes told another story. They darted once toward the POS register, where the manager stood guard. The same register that decided who got access to digital tips and who disappeared into the invisible list. Jackson's gaze followed hers. Every swipe, every credit card, every dollar in gratuity passed through that machine. And the same two people always stood closest to it, the manager, and the young man with slick-back hair wearing a too-perfect uniform. They laughed softly at an inside joke while Cassie hustled past with another tray. The unfairness wasn't shouted. It wasn't dramatic. It lived in the silence, in the way she kept moving, as if stopping might break her. Jackson lifted the paper cup again, but this time the bitterness wasn't in the coffee. It was in the truth settling quietly at the bottom. And in that moment, one thought crystallized. This wasn't a glitch in the system. This was the system. He didn't speak. He didn't reveal himself. Not yet. Just a quiet note in his mind, written in the same tone she had used, casual but devastating. Only certain people ever see them. 3 seconds of silence stretched longer than they should. Then Jackson did something simple. He pulled out a small notebook, set it beside the cooling coffee, and clicked his pen. Just a few quiet questions, a few quiet notes. A silent investigation had begun. Jackson stayed seated, his notebook half hidden under the paper cup, pen tapping once against the page. Around him, the cafe buzzed with the usual chaos of a morning rush. Orders shouted, blenders grinding, chairs scraping against tile. To most customers, it was background noise. To him, it was data. He watched Cassie move from table to table, sleeves rolled past her elbows, apron strings loose, every motion purposeful. She refilled water glasses before customers had to ask, slid napkins onto trays without breaking stride, and somehow kept the floor spotless even as the line at the counter stretched 20 feet long. She was carrying the weight of the shift. But when Jackson glanced at the register, he saw the imbalance. 2 employees lingered there like guardians of a gate. The manager, Brad Coleman, sharp shirt, polished shoes, leaned casually against the counter, pretending to help but rarely touching a tray. Beside him, Tyler slicked back hair, immaculate uniform, and a grin that never reached his eyes handled the screen. Every card swipe, every tip input, every digital transfer ran through his login. Jackson waited until Cassie passed close by his corner table. He spoke softly, just enough to be heard over the hum of the espresso machine. "Why don't you process the payments yourself?" She didn't stop moving, but her eyes flickered. Her voice dipped low as she collected a half-empty mug. "I don't have access. POS only lets certain roles take payments. If your name isn't on the list, you don't touch digital tips." She straightened, glanced toward the counter where Brad and Tyler laughed quietly over something on the screen, then added almost under her breath, "I'm listed as supplemental staff. It's basically the invisible list." Jackson's jaw tightened. He kept his expression neutral, but inside, the words cut sharper than the bitter coffee. Supplemental staff, invisible, designed that way. A moment later, Cassie slipped something from her apron pocket. Not a phone, not a receipt. An old, worn notebook, corners bent, pages soft from constant use. She set it down on his table for only a second, her hand covering most of the cover. "I didn't want to complain," she whispered. "I just needed to know I wasn't crazy." Then she pulled away, heading back toward table 9 with a tray balanced on one hand. Jackson lifted the notebook carefully, opening just far enough to see the neat handwriting inside. Dates, table numbers, bill totals, the POS tip amount, and in red ink, what she actually received. The gaps were wide, undeniable. Some days, entire shifts ended with 0 tips recorded for her, even though his eyes had just watched customers leave cash on the counter. He flipped another page. Notes in the margins, small arrows pointing to Tyler, register, circles around amounts that had vanished. At the bottom of one page, a single line stood out, written harder than the rest. Lost $612 in 1 month. No one asked who divided it. Jackson closed the notebook, pressing his palm flat on the cover. Not with finality, but with respect. Evidence didn't always come from spreadsheets or audits. Sometimes it came from the quiet persistence of someone no one bothered to see. Around him, the food court kept moving. Orders called out, trays slid down the counter, Tyler tapping the POS with effortless entitlement. To everyone else, it was just another morning. To Jackson, the investigation had already started. And if Brad Coleman thought he could hide behind structure, behind policy, behind the thin smile of authority, he was about to learn that even a silent notebook could speak louder than his entire system. Jackson didn't linger on the notebook too long. He had seen enough to know Cassie wasn't imagining things. Her records were precise dates, totals, even timestamps scribbled in the margins. You couldn't fake consistency like that. He slipped the notebook back across the table when she passed again, disguising the motion by sliding his empty cup with it. A folded sticky note tucked discreetly into the cover carried just one sentence in block letters. "Keep documenting, but don't give this to anyone else. Wait for me to return." Cassie caught the gesture, but didn't break stride. She moved on to another table, tray in hand, face calm. No one watching would have guessed what had just passed between them. Jackson leaned back, pulling out his phone under the table. A quick angle of the notebook pages he'd already photographed would be enough to confirm her story later. He sent the images through a secure channel, then opened his contacts. His thumb hovered for a moment before tapping a name. Mara Lynn, head of internal investigations. The call lasted exactly 93 seconds. His voice low, even. "Mara, we have a problem. The POS is being manipulated. I need a quiet sweep, line by line, roll by roll, every tip account." She didn't ask questions. After 7 years with the company, Mara had seen enough to know when Jackson spoke like that, it was serious. Her only response was, "Understood." Within the hour, the register at this cafe branch number 64 was switched into silent audit mode. Nothing looked different on the surface. Tyler still tapped the touchscreen with practiced ease. Brad still leaned against the counter, laughing with a customer he clearly wanted to impress. But every transaction now left a second trail, hidden, invisible to the staff, visible only to Jackson's internal team. And already, the first flags were rising. A new tier labeled Preferred Internal had been applied to 3 accounts. One belonged to Brad, another to Tyler, and a third to something called Kitchen Support 03. That third account raised a chill. No employee by that name existed in the HR system. No onboarding, no tax record. Just a ghost profile funneling money out every morning. Jackson's jaw set. He didn't react outwardly. He couldn't, not yet. To everyone else, he was just another customer who'd finished his cheap coffee and was taking too long at his table. But inside, the storm had started. This wasn't laziness. It wasn't even favoritism. It was a deliberate distortion, a system designed to erase people like Cassie while keeping the money flowing upward. And if Brad Coleman thought no one was watching, he had just made the biggest mistake of his career. Jackson stayed seated longer than he needed to, his empty coffee cup pushed aside, notebook closed. To anyone walking by, he looked like a man killing time before heading back to work. But every detail in the cafe was feeding into a pattern he could no longer ignore. Cassie moved like clockwork. Table 6 needed a refill. Table 9 waved for more toast. She pivoted with smooth precision, balancing trays as if they were extensions of her own hands. Not once did she go near the register. Not once did she touch the digital tips. Meanwhile, Tyler stood at the POS like it was his throne. His fingers tapped with practiced rhythm, occasionally running a card, then folding his arms again. Brad hovered close, checking his watch, laughing with customers he clearly favored. Every dollar of gratuity passed through them, and somehow the one person doing the most work remained invisible. When Cassie circled back to clear another plate, Jackson spoke softly. "Why don't you process payments yourself?" She bent slightly, stacking plates, voice almost a whisper. "I told you, I don't have access. Only certain roles can. Mine doesn't count." Her eyes flicked to the counter, where Brad leaned against the register with the casual authority of someone who had rewritten the rules for his own benefit. Tyler glanced over his shoulder, grinned at her hesitation, then turned back to the screen. Jackson didn't react, but his chest tightened. On paper, the system was supposed to be transparent. Tip splits by role, access tied to job function. But here, transparency had been twisted into cover. The rules weren't protecting fairness, they were shielding theft. A moment later, Cassie reached into her apron and pulled out that thin notebook again. She opened to a page halfway through and slid it across the table without stopping her movement. Notes filled the margins, arrows circling tip discrepancies, red ink underlining missing amounts. At the bottom of the page, one line caught Jackson's eye. $612 missing this month, but the silence hurts more than the money. Oh, she retrieved the notebook just as smoothly, slipping it back into her apron before Brad could glance over. For her, it wasn't just numbers, it was proof she existed in a system that wanted to erase her. Jackson let the silence settle. His coffee was cold, but he didn't care. In his head, the investigation map was already forming. Roles manipulated, tips funneled, ghost accounts hidden in the system, all of it pointing to the same conclusion. This wasn't sloppy management. It was deliberate. And as Brad threw his head back in laughter at the counter, Jackson wrote one final note in his mind. The louder the laughter, the closer the fall. By the next morning, Jackson didn't need to be in the cafe to know what was happening. The audit had already begun working quietly in the background. Every role assignment, every override, every tip transfer recorded in real time. At first glance, the numbers looked ordinary. Sales matched expectations. Orders flowed consistently. But when Mara's team compared tip distribution to table service data, the cracks widened into a canyon. Finding number 1. The POS had been modified with a hidden tier called Preferred Internal. That role didn't show on the staff-facing screen, but it carried advanced privileges, full control over tips. Only 3 accounts carried it. Brad Coleman, manager. Tyler Coleman, part-time server. And a third, kitchen support 03, finding number 2. Over the last 30 days, the cafe had processed $4,870 in digital tips. 68% of that money had been routed through Tyler's account, even though he had served less than 15% of the total tables. Finding number 3. Kitchen support 03 was a ghost. The ID clocked in nearly every morning, but HR had no file on the employee, no paperwork, no tax record, no social security match. A non-existent worker pulling real dollars. And then came the detail Jackson couldn't ignore. That third account was linked to payouts wired weekly to a shell entity, Douglas Henderson, LLC. On paper, it looked like a staffing vendor, but the contact email on the registration belonged to Brad Coleman. Jackson closed his eyes for a moment when Mara relayed the findings. This wasn't just favoritism. It wasn't even small-scale theft. It was structured fraud, engineered by a manager who had learned how to hide in the blind spots of policy. Back at the cafe, Cassie kept moving as if nothing had changed. She wiped tables, smiled faintly at customers, refilled cups. To her, it was just another shift. But Jackson knew now what those extra hours had cost her. Not just fatigue, but hundreds of dollars stolen in silence. Tyler, meanwhile, leaned against the counter again, tapping the register with idle ease. Brad appeared from the back, a new pen clipped neatly in his pocket, posture relaxed, as though the cafe were his stage. They laughed together, unaware that every keystroke, every override, every suspicious transfer was now visible to the very person sitting quietly in the corner booth. Jackson didn't confront them. Not yet. Timing mattered. A confrontation without proof could be dismissed. A confrontation with numbers, screenshots, and audit logs would be undeniable. He lifted his phone again, typing a short message to Mara. "Keep pulling the thread. I want every account, every transfer, every false login. Don't stop until we know who's behind support 03. The reply came seconds later. Understood. Jackson set the phone down, his gaze drifting back to Cassie. She caught his eye for just a moment. Not long, just enough for him to see the weariness she carried like a second uniform. She didn't know yet what he knew, but soon she would. And as Brad's laughter carried across the cafe, Jackson knew one thing with certainty. The next time he walked through those doors, he wouldn't be wearing a hoodie. Jackson didn't walk into the cafe the following morning right away. He let the system run another 24 hours under silent audit. He wanted patterns, not snapshots. And the patterns spoke volumes. Every card transaction, every gratuity entry, every payout. All of it flowed like water down the same channel to the same names. Brad and Tyler Coleman, father and son. And the ghost account, Kitchen Support 03, drawing steady siphons into Brad's personal LLC. By day 3, Mara's team had enough evidence to fill a binder. Tip logs, screenshots of the shadow tier, wire records, even the email trail connecting Brad's vendor shell to his corporate login. The fraud wasn't speculation anymore. It was fact. But Jackson knew numbers alone didn't change people. What changed them was truth, seen in the open. A system broken in silence had to be confronted in daylight. So, he returned to the cafe still undercover, cap pulled low, hoodie zipped. He watched Cassie again, still moving with quiet precision, her notebook tucked safely into her apron. She hadn't stopped documenting. Each order she served, each tip she never saw, she wrote it down like scripture. And when she passed near his booth, Jackson spoke softly, just loud enough to carry. "Keep writing, no matter what happens. Someday soon, it won't be ignored." She glanced at him, puzzled, but nodded. To her, he was just another regular who sometimes stayed too long over a cheap cup of coffee. She had no idea the man speaking to her could erase Brad's authority with one phone call. Across the counter, Brad carried himself like a man untouchable. He smiled wide for a customer in a suit, clapped a friend on the shoulder, and leaned over to whisper something that made Tyler chuckle under his breath. Every move radiated ownership. But ownership was the one thing Brad never had. Not of this cafe, not of the chain, not of the people he drained dry. That belonged to Jackson. The tension in the room built with every laugh, every dismissive glance. Customers came and went, unaware. Staff followed instructions, unwilling to speak up. Only Cassie kept writing, her notebook a silent indictment, sitting inches from her heart. By the time Jackson left that day, his plan was set. No more silent observations, no more waiting for the right page in a ledger. The next time he came back, he would walk through the doors not as a stranger, but as the owner. And he wouldn't be carrying a $2 cup of coffee. He'd be carrying the weight of every stolen dollar, every silenced shift, every invisible worker like Cassie who had been told she didn't count. That evening, Jackson sat in his office for the first time in weeks. The hoodie was gone, replaced by a tailored suit. His assistant spread the audit files across the desk, page after page of evidence. He picked up Cassie's photocopied notebook pages and placed them on top of the stack. Her handwriting wasn't perfect, but it was steady. More steady than Brad's fake smile. More steady than Tyler's privileged laugh. He thought about the line she had written at the bottom of one page. The silence hurts more than the money. That was it. That was why he did these undercover visits. Because silence was easy to ignore. But numbers, stories, faces, when combined, were impossible to deny. Jackson picked up his phone and called Mara. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "I'll be there. Have the files ready. We're not just correcting a system, we're confronting the people who broke it." He hung up, leaned back in his chair, and exhaled once. The stage was set. Back at the cafe, Brad probably laughed over another stolen dollar. Tyler probably bragged about another easy shift. And Cassie probably wrote another quiet line in her notebook, never guessing how soon her words would matter. Because tomorrow, the man in the hoodie wouldn't be just another customer. He'd be the CEO walking back into his own cafe. And this time, no one would be able to look away. The next morning, the cafe opened like it always did. Customers lined up for their quick breakfasts. The smell of burnt toast mingled with espresso, and the hum of voices filled the food court. Nothing seemed different until the man in the black cap didn't take his usual seat in the corner. Instead, Jackson Reeves walked straight to the counter. No hoodie this time. No faded cap. A tailored navy suit, polished shoes, and the quiet presence of someone who didn't need to announce who he was. Brad glanced up, already annoyed. "Sir, the line starts back there." He gestured vaguely toward the crowd of waiting customers. Jackson didn't move. He set a black leather folder on the counter, opened it, and slid out a single sheet of paper. Audit logs, names, numbers, transfers, all of it printed in crisp black and white. "You've been rerouting digital tips," Jackson said evenly. 68% through your son's account. The rest funneled into a ghost profile tied to your personal LLC, and you've been doing it for months. The words didn't come with a raised voice. They didn't need to. The cafe seemed to quiet on its own. Cassie froze mid-step, tray balanced on one hand. Tyler's grin faltered as he stared at the sheet of paper. Customers glanced up from their phones. Brad forced a laugh, shaking his head. "You can't just walk in here with accusations. Who even are you?" Jackson's answer was simple. He reached into the folder again and placed a business card on top of the audit logs. Jackson Reeves, founder and CEO. Silence spread wider, heavier than the smell of coffee. Cassie's eyes widened. Tyler's shoulders stiffened. Brad's smirk drained away in seconds. "This is my cafe," Jackson continued, his tone calm but sharp as glass. "My company, my staff, and you've been stealing from them in plain sight." A customer near the counter set down his cup with a hard clink. Another whispered something to her friend, the words carrying across the hush. "He owns this place?" Brad swallowed hard, eyes darting from the papers to the business card, then to the people now watching. His authority, once so casual, shrank under the weight of exposure. Jackson didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "I came here to see who this system protected, and who it erased. Now I know." And with that, the balance of power in the room shifted. For the first time, Brad wasn't the one in control. For a moment, no one in the cafe moved. The register lights blinked softly. The espresso machine hissed, but every pair of eyes was fixed on the man standing at the counter. Brad opened his mouth again, trying to recover. "This is ridiculous. Anyone can print papers. Anyone can make up numbers. You can't prove—" Jackson cut him off, sliding a second sheet across the counter. This isn't made up. These are wire records. Transfers from Kitchen Support 03 to your LLC. You registered it with your own corporate email. Do you want me to read it out loud, or would you prefer to explain it yourself? The color drained from Brad's face. Tyler shifted uneasily beside him, muttering, "Dad," but the words sounded more like panic than support. Customers began whispering, some lifting their phones, recording what was clearly no longer just a morning coffee run. Cassie stood frozen, tray still in hand, eyes darting between Jackson and the manager who had controlled her every shift. Jackson didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His tone stayed steady, every word landing like a verdict. You've stolen not only from this company, but from the people who serve customers every single day. The ones you silenced. The ones you treated as invisible. He turned slightly, looking at Cassie. Like her. The entire cafe followed his gaze. Cassie blinked, unsure what to do, suddenly in the center of a spotlight she had never asked for. Jackson nodded gently, reassuring. She kept the only honest ledger in this cafe. While you manipulated the system, she documented the truth. Cassie's throat tightened, but she managed a quiet, "I just wanted it to be fair." Jackson's expression softened for the first time that morning. "And now it will be." He looked back at Brad. "Effective immediately. You're suspended pending full investigation. Your access is revoked. HR and legal will handle the rest." Brad tried to speak, but Tyler blurted out instead, "You can't do this. My dad." Jackson held his gaze firmly. "Your shifts here are over too. You benefited from stolen money. That ends today." The silence that followed was heavy, final. The kind that doesn't leave room for excuses. Then Jackson turned toward Cassie again. "As for you, I want you on the training team. Employees like you shouldn't just survive this system. You should shape the next one." Her eyes widened. "Me? I'm not." "You are," Jackson interrupted gently. "Because you kept going when it would have been easier to quit. You wrote it down when everyone else looked away. That's leadership." For the first time since he'd entered, the cafe erupted not in chaos, but in a ripple of applause. Customers who had sat silently moments earlier clapped softly, some nodding toward Cassie. Even the trainee near the pastry rack let out a relieved laugh, shoulders loosening. Brad stood frozen, stripped of his false authority. Tyler looked down, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Cassie exhaled slowly, gripping her tray tighter, as if grounding herself in a reality she hadn't dared to imagine. Jackson gathered the papers, slipped them back into the folder, and spoke clearly for everyone to hear. "Fairness isn't a favor. It's a standard. And if it doesn't exist, we create it. Starting here." No one argued. No one even tried. The truth was out, printed on paper, spoken aloud, witnessed by every customer in the room. And as Jackson stepped back from the counter, the shift was complete. Power no longer sat with Brad or Tyler. It sat with the people who had been overlooked, and finally, with the truth. The cafe didn't feel the same after that morning. The air had shifted. The laughter that used to echo from behind the register was gone, replaced by something quieter, heavier, but cleaner. Customers sipped their coffee with a different kind of awareness, as if they had witnessed a curtain being pulled back. Cassie stood near the counter, notebook still tucked against her side. She wasn't smiling wide, not celebrating, just breathing, steady for the first time in weeks. The applause had faded, but the respect in the room lingered. For once, people looked at her, not through her. Brad and Tyler left under the silence of eyes that no longer recognized their authority. No shouting, no dramatic exit. Just two men stripped of the power they had borrowed and abused. Jackson remained at the counter a moment longer, then turned to Cassie. "Keep writing," he said softly. "But from now on, let it be notes about progress, not proof of theft." Her voice caught, but she nodded. "Thank you for seeing me." He gave a quiet nod, then stepped away, leaving her with the register that had once shut her out. This time, the screen was open, her access restored. She tapped a button, and for the first time, the system recognized her login. A simple beep, but it sounded like justice. As Jackson walked out of the cafe, the food court noise resumed trays clattering. Orders shouted, but he carried the silence of reflection with him. He had built an empire of restaurants, but numbers on a balance sheet never told the full story. The truth was always here, in the corners, in the ordinary voices no one wanted to hear. In the back of his mind, Cassie's words lingered. The silence hurts more than the money. Oh, that line would stay with him longer than any audit file, because money could be replaced, systems could be reset. But dignity, once stolen, left scars. He paused by the glass doors, phone in hand. One quick message to Mara. Action completed, POS reset. Training initiated. Make sure every branch knows this will never happen again. Her reply came seconds later. Understood. And Cassie? Jackson typed back. She starts next week as a trainer. Put her name on the memo. Oh, great. He slid the phone into his pocket, exhaled once, and stepped into the morning light. Voiceover. Fairness isn't a privilege we grant when it's convenient. It's a promise we keep, every shift, every paycheck, every day. Because the ones who serve, who stay, who refuse to be erased, they're the foundation. And if leadership means anything, it means protecting them first. The screen fades to Cassie closing her notebook for the last time. On the final page, instead of red circles and missing numbers, she has written only one line. Today, the system listened. Fade to black.